Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session in our Library and Cal webinar series dedicated to teaching research in the classroom. And today we're going to start things off with how students approach research. This is something, we all do, whether or not we know it, and students, have a different take on research than we do. So we're going to explore today how students approach research. So welcome. So who are we? I am Megan Kowalski. I am the Outreach and Reference Librarian, and today I am joined by my colleague, Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Niels. I'm the Reference and Assessment Librarian at the library at UDC.
Yeah. So why are we doing this webinar series? Well, one, we wanted to discuss our experience in working with students and faculty because it shows the need for support on all sides when it comes to the teaching and learning experience, particularly as it relates to research. Kathy and I are currently doing a research study. And it shows the need for us at the library to further support teaching faculty. And so we want to share what we have learned in our research study. And this is the first webinar in that series because a librarian's role is to support both faculty and students in learning research and in teaching research because this is what we're here for. And so we're looking to begin a more collaborative teaching, faculty, and librarian relationship and a dialogue where we can invite commentary and feedback because what we see in the classroom differs from what you see versus what the students experience. And so what we have recognized is that faculty are expected to be content experts in a specific subject field, and they're also expected to be pedagogy experts. And research pedagogy is an important subset of that often doesn't get its own time and focus.
Great. So just a quick overview of what we're planning to cover today. So about how students approach research. We'll start with their backgrounds in research and any previous knowledge they bring, how they approach the process. This starts from when they are thinking about coming into college, when they get an assignment, and then while they're working on the assignment. We'll talk about the affective or emotional experience of research, and then how you can address all of these factors in the classroom to support students' growth as researchers and users of information. This is important, of course, in academic work in your classes, but also for students' real lives in their professional work outside or after the university. So what we're sharing today is building on our own experiences, our own daily experiences working with students and faculty, the research project that Megan mentioned, as well as the library and information science research and literature in this area.
So let's get started by talking about, what students anticipate when they come into the classroom. And students usually know that they have to do research in college. It's just sort of the vibe of college. Everyone knows when they come here, they're going to be expected to do some level of research. However, there are varying levels of understanding of what academic research really is or what the purpose of academic research is. And so what we've noticed is students have a wide array of experiences and expectations in what they anticipate coming into the classroom. Some students will have experience doing academic research, either in high school or at previous institutions, particularly if they are transfer students. And some will have a good sense of what it means to do academic research. Other students will have no background at all. And some students might think of research as citations. Like they literally equate doing research with creating citations. They'll say, oh yeah, I know research, but what they really mean is I have used MLA citations before. And so they might not think of it as, something broader. They might just think I'm using something, I'm citing it, that's research. And, we librarians know that there's far more to it than that. Some students might think of it as plugging in quotes that they find instead of doing the critical thinking and analysis and expressing their own voice and opinions. They see it as collecting information to use rather than synthesizing information and adding to it. Some students might not have encountered how research can vary incredibly by discipline. Research conducted in science experiments and lab reports is incredibly different from research conducted for argumentative essays or literary analyses. They might also expect a linear process, step A, step B, step C, rather than seeing it as an exploration. And we'll get to that later. And they also, and I'm just going to make this a broad point, most students expect Google can do everything for them. That's not the case. Some may know Google's not the best place to go, but at some point, our students just go with Google.
So let's talk about what students arrive with. As Megan mentioned, students are coming in with a huge variation of previous experiences and knowledge regarding academic research specifically. Not just true of first-time in college students, but students at all levels. So students may or may not know what an academic library does. They may not be familiar with the available resources. They may or may not be able to find or analyze things. And this is especially true with the huge range of students and previous experiences that UDC has. But it's important to note that invariably students do come in with some kind of background in information seeking in real life that's possible to draw on as you teach academic research. Students in some way are already researchers. They have perhaps done some research for finding a school for their children. They've looked for health information for themselves or a loved one. They probably did some research on UDC before applying and picking UDC as where they're going to go to school. And oftentimes I think students don't think of this as research experience, but research can be a lot of things and it takes place in a lot of different contexts. And that previous knowledge and experience that they do have is something to build on. There are ways to transfer some of this into the world of academic research. And it's also important to keep in mind that students are living in a world of information overload, right? I've seen this described as ambient information all around us. They know that they're being presented information based on algorithms. Another concept that I really like and I think is relevant here is this idea of information finding you rather than vice versa, right? We are presented information, we are fed information largely by algorithms rather than going to find it in a lot of cases, right? And this is how research differs. Once upon a time, you could go to the library, you find resources in the library, you do the research, the end, and now information is everywhere. I think too, the other factor is this myth of the digital native, right? This idea that students, especially younger ones or Gen Z, are familiar with technology. They just intuitively know it. They intuitively find it. They get what all resources are out there. And how that shows up in the world of research, I think that's actually a myth, right? We all have to learn how to do things, regardless of our age or our previous experience with technology. But how that shows up in the research world is that students often come with a familiarity with a certain scope of technology, right? They're really good with smartphones, they're really good with iPads, and basic awareness that there is a lot of information available, right? But they usually tend to rely on the familiar. So we all need to learn how to use things and need to learn what is available to all of us beyond the familiar.
So what does this mean in the classroom itself? Well, when students get a research assignment, they can experience quite a bit in just a few seconds. Students' initial reactions to getting academic research assignments can range pretty far from feeling, yeah, this is fine, I can do it, to outright fear. And we've learned this from certain classroom activities we've done, where we've done Mentimeters and Padlets, where we ask students to respond either to a poll or one of our Padlets as we say, hey, you're being told you have to do a research assignment, find a GIF that, shows how you feel. And we'll see everything from someone being like, they're so upset, to someone very eager to do it, to Homer slowly sneaking back into the bushes because students would rather not have to think about it. We've also done a fun, project at the beginning of our classes where we say, draw your research process. And this has been enlightening because students tend to show us, the range of emotions they go through. And some students just write Google. Like that's what they think of when they think of research. And other students, show a stick figure feeling all of these emotions. And so this is what we've encountered with students. We see both the positive and the negative. With the positive, students tend to be excited. They're excited to finally get to work on something, particularly if they like the subject matter that they're going to be able to research. Some of them are intrigued and some of them are curious. Particularly at the start of the fall, there's a lot of energy around the start of the new semester. And so you can see that in the way students respond. But at the same time, we see the negative. students are overwhelmed, particularly if this assignment is coming on top of another assignment, on top of another assignment, on top of whatever else they have going on in life. They can also be nervous. It's simply, are they going to get an A on this? Do they have time to do it? And that can show up. They'll be stressed, they'll be scared, or they might be indecisive. Like they have this assignment and they're like, okay, I have the time to do it. But what the heck do I write about? And so all of this can show up at the same time. We'll see all of these emotions in, one single student. And so what we've also seen from our own experience is that some students present with shame that they don't know what's next. They feel like this is something they should already know how to do, even though that's not necessarily true. Yes, if you're in an upper level course, we hope you've encountered a research assignment before. But if you're a first year student in your first iGED writing class and you're given a research assignment, we shouldn't necessarily expect that you know how to do academic research from the start. And our own experiences are backed up in existing library and information science research. Students are often intimidated, that they don't know how to use the library sources. Like they enjoy looking at topics that are of interest to them, but they tend to stick with what they know. And what they know tends to be things like Google, social media, what their friends have told them, maybe they know a few newsletters or websites they can go to. And they don't necessarily go to use the library's resources because the amount of resources that are available to you and the anticipated skill level they think they need to use those can tend to scare them away. And so university libraries have so many resources, and such a large variety of resources. And then we're asking students, okay, now you need to learn all of these, learn these scholarly sources. And there's a little bit of fear there. And what is interesting is what our students come with. Some of our students have come from schools where they have no library at all. Some students have come from schools where they have, it's a traditional high school library. They've got some databases, they've got some books and things like that. And other students have come from well-funded private schools, charter schools, or previous universities with a ton of resources. And it's worth keeping in mind that the average college library has about 19 times as many online library databases and 9 times as many books and journals as the average high school library. So students are already living in this world of information overwhelm, and then they enter a library and it gets even bigger. Another thing that the literature says is that students are unclear about professors' expectations. Yes, they have an assignment, but there's also trying to figure out that relationship they have with the professor. What kind of writing style is that professor going to want? When they say 3 to 5 pages, is it okay if it's 3, or does the professor really, really, really want 5 pages? There's this unsure expectation of what the professor wants, what they expect, what leeway they're going to get. Like if they're providing citations, if they miss a period, is that an automatic failure? Some professors are sticklers like that. And because every single professor is different, the students don't know what they're walking into with each class. And a lot of the assignment directions within an assignment students are handed focus on the mechanics and the formatting and the final product rather than the process of research and how students get from finding a topic to finding their resources and starting a paper. They're told the end goal and the mechanics, but they're not necessarily told the process that gets them to that end goal. And so what we've discovered and what the literature backs up is getting started is the biggest challenge when it comes to research. And so on top of what we've previously mentioned about all of those feelings, that students bring to an assignment, the research process, just like learning itself, can be highly emotional. And what we have on the screen here is Kuhlthau's information search process. And what it's trying to do is break down, the affective, cognitive, and physical actions that happen within the search process. So as you'll see, as students go from the quote unquote beginning of research to the final end product, there's a lot of feelings. They start out uncertain and then maybe, once they have a topic, okay, I'm pretty optimistic. And then they start exploring that research. And this is where a lot of emotions come out. They're confused because are they finding the right stuff? They're frustrated because, maybe finding that one peer-reviewed article they need is not going. And then they doubt whether they've picked the right subject. And even more scarily, they doubt themselves that they have the skills to do this. But then as they work through the research process, they do sort of develop a sense of of clarity, the more they start to do research and the more they start to work on a particular assignment. And then towards the end, as they're collecting research, they get a sense of direction and confidence, like, okay, I can do this. And then when it comes to the presentation of that, whether, it's a presentation, a podcast they're giving or a paper they're writing, it can go two ways. They can be satisfied with what they're creating, or they can be disappointed, both either in their end product or how they felt doing it. I mean, at the end, hopefully they do gain a sense of accomplishment. But as you can see, as this goes, they go from having these vague thoughts to increased interest and focus, and hopefully ending, in a more confident sense of self. And so this is just something we want to keep in mind, is that as students are doing research, it's highly emotional, and they're going to, backtrack on some of these things the more they work. But this is just something to keep in mind, that research isn't just, a straight cut process. There's a lot of emotions that go into that, which then in turn impacts how the students conduct that research and create their final research product.
So let's move into what's going on when students are actually working on research, when they're in the research process. As we've mentioned, students often have the expectation that research will be a linear process, right? I find something, I write something, I cite something, I turn it in, so on and so forth. And they anticipate being able to find information and just knock out the assignment, finish that. But their anxiety tends to go up when that doesn't happen, because that's not how research works, right? The research is very exploratory, right? It isn't a linear process. And so that mismatch between their expectations and the actual experience creates that level of anxiety. So a couple of challenges in particular that the literature suggests that students face is, as Megan was saying before, getting started, specifically narrowing down a topic. That is often an early stumbling block. Research projects are most effective and meaningful to students when they're able to choose their own topic and their own area of interest, make it relevant and personal to them or their communities. But figuring out how to narrow down an idea into something a little bit more concrete and researchable and manageable can be a huge stumbling block. That's something we often work with students on, trying to figure out the kind of right scope of their research question that they're working on, right? It's too much to say, what is the impact of gentrification in DC, right? That's too broad. What is the impact of gentrification on, a specific neighborhood in Ward 8? Probably a little bit too specific in terms of what you'll be able to find. So where's the happy medium, right? What are the other lenses that you're going to bring into it? Perhaps you're interested in the economic side of things. Perhaps you're interested in the psychological and social side of things. Perhaps, you're interested in some other aspect of it that we haven't mentioned yet. So narrowing down that topic can be a really tough stumbling block for students. In terms of other things that students find challenging in the process, effective and efficient searches, right? I think students often know conceptually how to search, but to do it in a different setting and, academic database or library catalog, that can be challenging, right? You have to learn a new set of skills for that, and to do it efficiently, right? Then finding and choosing sources, right? This is really also because you have to sort through stuff that doesn't meet your needs, right? We were talking about the information overload, the information overwhelm, the information coming to you. And so students are facing this challenge of having to pick through all of the things, sort through all of the things that aren't quite what they need, right? And then another thing is reading and summarizing, right? Inserting their own analysis, inserting their own voice, right? Students often will say, oh, I need to just say quote, 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 I'm putting in quotes, sandwiching quotes. But we want to know what their analysis is, right? They're bringing something new to a scholarly conversation. And that's what they kind of struggle with sometimes, is how to do that. So when we ask students where they start with research, the answer is almost universally Google. And that's fine in terms of background information collecting. But for academic research, that might also reflect a kind of risk aversion to control the information available to them. So again, that idea of relying on the familiar sources and the processes, while they're also trying to navigate what professors expect of them. We know from research and from our own student surveys that students are using library resources when they're aware of them. right? One of the things we often hear when we work with students was, I had no idea a lot of this was available, right? And this is why we're trying very hard to work more with, freshman orientation, IGD writing sequences, so on and so forth. The awareness is very important early on. And we know students do try to find shortcuts, try to find something easy. And that's partly in response to academic demands and the demands of assignment. And then for a lot of our students, just the demands of life, right? Students have a lot going on. And so they're trying to figure out how to do this efficiently as well.
And so how does this show up in the actual research process itself? Well, there's a lot of satisficing, and everybody does this, from students on up to librarians, on up to, PhD level researchers. One way this looks, and I like this analogy because it relates to food, is we all know there is bad pizza. We know there's good pizza, and we know there's great pizza. But when there are too many options, the pizza that is nearby will do, because we just need to fulfill that hunger. And so that's what satisficing does. When there is too much out there, too many choices to make, too many decisions to make, decision fatigue sets in. And particularly when you're on a deadline to turn in an assignment, good enough will have to do. And so we all do this. Students just want to have something to finish that is good enough to turn in. Yes, you will have those high achievers who want to find the best of everything for what they're working on, but for the vast majority of students, and honestly, the vast majority of researchers, satisficing will do. And so, one of our concerns is the emotions of that. When they're turning something in, they're like, was that good enough? There is that uncertainty. I apologize. Our fire alarm just went off and scared the bejesus out of me. So there is this idea that when they turn something in, are they proud of that? And so this is where, again, those emotions come in, that uncertainty. Are they uncertain about the quality of the work that they've done? And so, yes, they want something to turn in. They want it to be good enough to get a good grade, but there is always going to be that uncertainty. And part of this comes from students not connecting the process of research with the reasons why. We all don't do a good job of explaining, why does research look like this? Why do we use scholarly sources? Why are scholarly academic sources considered, quote unquote, better than other material out there? We don't necessarily connect students to the process by explaining, the greater idea of what information means and why some things are considered better than others, because again, it's all amorphous. Better changes depending on the context. And one of our good examples of this that we've been using is when students are wanting to write about the COVID pandemic, we tell them, yes, talking to the doctors and talking to the scientists who are doing research in this area, those are great quality resources, but so are the personal experiences of the patients. They're not experts in a field, but if they've had COVID and were intubated, that's certainly worth considering. And so talking to students and trying to connect them more to the why behind we do research and why behind some information is used in different ways is an important way to connect them to the process. And so that satisficing isn't so scary, because they're like, okay, yes, I've hit what I've needed to hit. I've found the information I need to find. And yes, it's good enough, but I can be confident that the good enough that I found is quality information.
All right, so we've set the stage. So now what is it that you can do in the classroom and with your students? So some thoughts that we have on that. First is just to acknowledge or address that emotional affective side of research. I'm sure a lot of us do that, where students bring a lot to the classroom. And so, this is not probably something that is unfamiliar, right? But I think, knowing how that manifests itself in research specifically is important to acknowledge, right? Research is hard. Learning to do research is a process. Again, I think, a lot of students come in, they're like, well, why don't I know how to do this? I should know how to do this. And the fact of the matter is, if they haven't been taught or had experiences, that's not necessarily true, right? It's not something you learn by osmosis. I've said that to students before, right? You have to learn the process. And one ways you can do that is by modeling and demonstrating the process itself, right? Looking at the process in addition to, in order to get students to the final product. So showing that research is complicated, showing that research is an explorative, is an exploration, sorry. And this is also a really good opportunity for some metacognition in the classroom, right? Thinking about what it is that research means. Why am I doing this? How am I thinking through this? What is the process? I think another thing to model is because research is exploratory, this idea of what we refer to amongst ourselves and possibly in the literature too, but I haven't seen it quite in this way, is research resiliency, right? So what happens when things inevitably go a little bit sideways, right? Different from what you expect. When your searches for information don't quite work out, you're not finding exactly what you need, or you're not really sure about this topic. You started looking for stuff and there's just like too much out there. Where do you do now? And so this idea that since research is a process, since research is exploratory, since research is iterative, think about it as a form of resilience, right? As kind of a growth mindset. This is a normal part of the process. It's okay. There are people to help you through this, both you as a professor and us as librarians. And this is important because, negative affect and negative emotions, I'm sure, this is also a familiar idea, can impact cognitive outcomes in the classroom, right? So one of the things that we are trying to do is help students learn what the Colthau information search process that we mentioned before. She's a library and information science researcher. She refers to this as the tolerance of uncertainty, right? And that's tricky, right? But I think it is part of the process, and understanding that that is part of the arc of research. So students do need guidance throughout the process so that they understand what's going on. And without that kind of guidance and explicit support, they do tend to approach the research process as collect, copy paste from sources that they found. They're not necessarily doing the kind of critical thinking or engagement with the sources or synthesizing of sources that we want, right? So I would say, in addition to encouraging that teaching the process and the metacognition, is talk about that process in assignments in addition to the requirements. Help students know what it is they need to do and how they might get there. And again, since big stumbling blocks are at the beginning with research getting started, the topics, right? Finding something that's researchable and manageable and a good research question. Students, I think, could use extra support developing topics and research questions and starting that process, right? So paying attention to that, I think, is a really important part of this as well.
And so another thing you can do is don't assume any previous experience or knowledge. Again, students are coming to us with vastly different backgrounds, even in the same class, even in the same subject matter. All students have different experience in research. Some students really just like searching for things. So those skills, that they use in real life are just copy and paste right into academic research, and they're there. Other students completely freeze up because they're like, I have no background in this whatsoever. And so how you can sort of resolve some of those gaps is to make connections between previous life research and the academic research we're undertaking. I'm constantly telling students when I'm demonstrating the databases, if you can go shopping on Amazon, you can search a library database. The skills are the same. Yeah, the filters on Amazon are for, 5-star rating, peer review, 2-day shipping, or not peer review, Amazon Prime 2-day shipping, things like that. It's the same thing as how filters work. Students know how to search. That's actually the one skill we actually don't need to teach them. The concept of conducting a search is there. But what we librarians can support and what you as faculty can support is that awareness of resources. Where should students go to get this material? But then more necessarily, why do they go there? Why would they go to, dc.gov to find information about a recycling program over, just Googling recycling? These are things we can explain. So librarians can help address these issues. You don't have to do this on your own. And so this is where you can call on us to fill the gap. And the more we know about your assignment, the better. Having the assignment is great, particularly if we can then go back to you and be like, okay, we have some questions. And so when your students come to us, we can more fully engage them in the process. And the reason you might want to consider bringing in a librarian in some capacity is that we can be mediators between faculty expectations and then the students developing information literacy. Librarians, we've been trained in this. We do this every day. Students and even faculty don't. And so we have a responsibility to see where those blind spots may be. In some instances, we see stuff and an assignment's asking for sources, and we're like, those are great. However, And we say, however, because things like the peer review process takes time, or those resources are paywalled and we don't have access at our library, and we don't want students to have to find that information. And so we can more explicitly make that clear to either you as a faculty member, or to set those expectations with students that, oh, if your professor wants you to use 5 resources, don't just start with the first 5 you find. You're going to want more than that so you can compare and contrast and think critically about it. So that's why it's important to bring in the library early. The more we know, the more we can help. But you can also address these gaps in the classroom simply by setting those expectations, giving the assignment early. The earlier you can give the assignment, better. Yes, students will always procrastinate. We all do. But the more they can at least think about their topic, that helps get things started, which is, we know, where students stumble the most. So please don't hesitate to call us in at any time. It is what we are here for. And so we were using today's session as a way to sort of enter into this whole series on teaching research in the classroom. And we hope you enjoyed this webinar and can either join us live with the other sessions or receive the recordings. And you can sign up for those either on the library's website or through the CAL's website. But we would now like to have time for questions and then open discussion if you want to share what it's been like teaching research in your classroom or what you've seen. So please feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the comments, and we'll also leave some time for unrecorded questions at the end. And this recording will be posted to our YouTube, so you can go back to it at any time or share it with your colleagues.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So my name is Amelia, and I am currently in grad school. And so this is my first semester. I've been out of school for 10 years now, or over 10 years actually. And so I definitely signed up for this because I had to do a reflective paper that's due this week. And I was just like, why is it so difficult for me to do this? Like, I should know what to do, even though it's a reflective paper. I'm like, I should know what to do, but why is it so difficult for me to get my mindset on this? And so I was a little intimidated because, like I said, I've been out of school for so long and things have changed. I'm like, oh, do I even remember how to do citations properly? Or, the research that I need to do, like, how do I divide it from being plagiarized and then just put it into my own words? And so I felt like I really needed this. I'm still trying to navigate everything. And like one of the things that you said earlier was, like students will say, well, I should know how to do this. Like, why is this so challenging and so difficult? And that's what I'm still faced with right now. I'm pretty sure like as I get more into doing it and get back in the groove of things, I will get it. But as of now, it's just like, it's like a brain freeze for me. Like, it's just like, I don't know where to begin and where to start. So this presentation is very helpful, very thankful. Any ones that you do have in the future, I will be signing up for those and, attending those because I really do feel I need it. And hopefully I pray that I have success in completing my master's and, just getting better with getting over this hump of feeling intimidated with doing the research that I know I'm going to have to do in the future, but getting prepared to do that. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, Amelia, thank you for attending today and thank you for sharing your experience. Everything you're feeling is exactly what every other student is feeling. We see it all the time. And so the library can also offer, particularly for grad students, we offer appointments, which we can do online or in person. So if you just go to the library's website, you can set one up there or shoot us an email and we're happy to meet with you. Because as you said, that getting started is the hard part. That's generally the hard part. Like, we've had a professor in our research study outright say, I call in the librarians to teach when my students are frustrated, because that's when, our skill set of being able to navigate this world of information is helpful. And so what you're feeling is 100% what everyone else is feeling. So don't feel like you're alone, and the library is here to support you. So we would be happy to meet with you, to get over that hurdle of getting started, even with reflective papers, because even reflective papers do sometimes need some background research. And we can sort of help you. We're like a brainstorm partner. We can help you figure out what you want to talk about, why you want to talk about it, and then where you could get information to support that. So again, thank you for attending today. And You can see the rest of the webinars on our website. If you can't attend live, you can sign up for the recordings. Kathy, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Thank you.
No, just that I did the same thing. I had 11 years between undergraduate and graduate school. So I'm familiar with that hurdle, but we're here to help with that. So please feel free to reach out anytime. We have a question in the chat from Professor George. I know that Google is not great, but how about Google Scholar? Is that better? I think the short answer is it depends, which I know is a tough, tricky response, but it depends on what you're trying to do, right? Sometimes Google is great, right? If you're trying to do background research, if you have a personal research need, you know, Google is there for that, right? Google Scholar has a different function, right? Google Scholar offers, you know, some scholarly literature, but also, you know, gray literature, right? Stuff that maybe hasn't been quite published yet. And, you know, some like white papers, that kind of thing as well. So it has a different function, right? I would say sometimes to students, like, no one particular information source is necessarily good or bad, right? It's not black or white, it is gray, and it also depends on what you're trying to do. Who is your audience? What is the question you're trying to answer? Whose voices do you need to hear? What is the context? You know, all of those things help lead you in a direction of picking the right information source in the particular place where you should start. I hope that's helpful. Does that make sense?
And I do want to add, the one thing Google Scholar has going for it is the fact that it puts resources sort of into conversation with one another. It'll show a particular article and then show who's linked, you know, who has cited that and who is, you know, is cited in that article. And so it's a great way to do citation chaining and things like that. So it's a good way to see context. But again, Google Scholar, like regular Google, is sort of at the mercy of the algorithm and the rankings, which are clear as mud. I couldn't explain them to you because sometimes they promote things based on citations, sometimes they promote things based on recency, sometimes it's both. It's kind of all over the place. And the one thing, students don't necessarily differentiate between Google Scholar and Google. To them, Google is Google. Sometimes they'll understand, okay, Google Scholar is where I go to get peer reviewed, but that's about it. And so students can end up falling back into the bad habit of going to Google first for everything. And the problem with Google first for everything is that, again, it's at the mercy of the algorithm, at the mercy of the ranking, and ads are mixed in. So that paid promoted content tends to rise to the top of things. So those are just some things to keep in mind. I personally use Google Scholar all the time, but it's one of those, as Kathy said, it depends. So it's one of those, please feel free to demonstrate it to your students, but with a couple of caveats, like put it in context. It's providing that why behind it. We found that the why aspect of research really helps students connect and understand better, you know, how research works and why we do it the way we do.
Yeah, the context is really important, right? I think, you know, students are going to be using, hopefully, some of these skills, you know, in their future lives, whether they continue down the academic path or whether they go into a professional world and they're doing professional development or just using stuff in their own real life, right? And so I think understanding the range of sources available to them, the range of resources available to them, and when each one is appropriate for particular needs, to reflect on those needs. What is it that I really need, right? Whose voices do I need to hear? How much information do I need? Those are all questions that come into play as well in this decision of, you know, where to start. So we've gone a little bit further afield from Google and Google Scholar, but I think the short version is it's really messy, just like the rest of research.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate your response.
Thank you. Just seeing if any more questions are coming in.
So I have another quick question. I heard you guys say like we can make appointments. So the links that you have up here, the udc.libguides.com, is that the website where you go to make the appointments?
Yes. So if you go to that, it's our homepage, and over on the left-hand side, you'll see a box that says contact us. And in that box will be a link to make an appointment.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to make a comment. More and more, I so appreciate when people talk about what the things we're asked to do, what it feels like for us as human beings to actually get them done. So even in research, I would not have thought about it on behalf of my students. I feel it myself. I experience the fear and the trepidation myself, depending on what I have to do. If it's real familiar topic or real familiar thing, then it's not a problem. But if I'm looking for something very specific and I'm unable to find it, those feelings do grow. So I appreciate the conversation and the insights that you've presented today, because that really kind of opens things up for me for talking to my students as I work with them to do research in my program.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. I think, that is the challenge of teaching something, right, that you're an expert in, right, is trying to put yourself back in that beginner's mindset. So for me, I sort of have this like little mental list of things that I just don't understand, right? And so every time I'm trying to kind of, work with a student who's getting into this for the first time, it's like, there's certain, physics, like my brain just doesn't work that way, right? I've tried, it doesn't work. And so I try to think about that. That's what a student might be encountering, right? Putting yourself in that beginner's mindset, I think, can be helpful, but it's also really hard.
Okay, not seeing anything else come in, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so we can have time for unrecorded Q&A.